and frankly, I've never been anywhere that I haven't found, some real beauty and some things to appreciate. From upstate New York to the Yukon to Alaska to the West Coast to southern Louisiana there's fantastic stuff. If we just open our eyes to it and hopefully work to save it, to make sure that the next generations see it.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, where we interview travelers, explorers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the best tips and stories from around the world. So Art, I don't know if you know or not, but you're a living local legend around here. This is coming from...
Because I'm old.
Yes. Okay. Well, however you want to look at it, everybody who's ever been through the parks knows about you. All of my friends who were all into nature photography. Wow. The gold standard. You're sitting here in my studio, which is really awesome for me.
I'm humbled. I really am.
Well, your work speaks for itself, though, because every picture I've ever seen that you post, I'm like, damn, I want to be that good someday. And, photography is fun. I love it as much as the next guy. Like, I'm big into all the outdoor stuff. That's why I do this. This is a big charade, the outdoor stuff, the podcast, the videos, whatever. I think, though, on the scale of things, photography might be top 1 or 2 favorite outdoors activities in general, because it's not as invasive as like hunting or fishing. Right. You're capturing a moment and you get to relive that moment. It tells a story, but it's not harmful. It's just kind of the leave no trace principle everybody's always talking about. And, I brought something. You're an elusive man. There's not a lot of info. You don't put a lot of stuff out there. Yeah.
Well, I'm just, I just do what I do. I don't try to get out there. I'm not a, hey, look at me kind of guy. I'm more of a, look at this photo and try to save this place kind of a thing. And so that's really who I am. So,
well, I found, looking through some old news articles, I found this in my house that my wife used to have. You know what that is?
That's a brownie.
Yeah.
It's like my first camera.
Yeah. So I believe that's where your story starts, is it?
Excuse me. Yeah, pretty much. But I had no idea where it was going at the time. Yeah, somebody gave me a roll of 120, which is what this takes, which is for probably most of your listeners, that means nothing, except it's a large negative format camera with a plastic lens that takes blurry stuff really well. And some of my earliest stuff was done at the Toledo Zoo, just standing outside these antelope enclosures and stuff and just clicking photos. And I thought it was great. I had so much fun doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I didn't start out to do photography or writing, really. I thought I was going to be an engineer. I thought I was going to do chemistry and that sort of thing, chemical engineering. Mm-hmm. And just a lot of really fortunate accidents took me on this crooked course that gets me to talking to you today. So
now you're in trouble.
No, I thought, no, this is an honor. I don't know. The story is long and complicated, and it's not really worth getting into, except that it was all driven by a love of the outdoors and running into other people that love the outdoors who happened to know what I like to do, who said, hey, do you know there's a job open over here? And, it's one of those kind of things that you just, it was a series of the most fortunate accidents for me.
Well, and I think one of the things that's really critical that I talk about all the time, a lot of people from this area talk about all the time, but nobody else gets it, is Northwest Ohio, especially within the Metroparks, whether it's Toledo Metroparks, Wood County Metroparks, wherever you go to the state forest, whatever, we have beautiful, beautiful landscapes around here, and it's just overlooked. And that's something I've been preaching for years on this show, is just like, give it a shot. Come here. We have more conservation organizations than we know what to do with around here. Right. We have huge swaths of land that are protected by the park districts, and we have the amazing Maumee River, which is one of my favorite places anywhere, and we have just so many natural, beautiful places. And I think you capture them so well, like the fog rising up off the river and stuff like those. Like that's like the Art Weber photo right there. And how do you go about that from a creative approach? Is it just a natural, like you get there early, you kind of just wait and sit and chill and get that photo, or you go with a plan in mind? Because for me, landscape photography is one of the most difficult things. Like wildlife photography is tough, and then you have to be reactive and know your camera. But to capture the landscape as it is so challenging to me. So what's your process there?
The first thing is something that there's a couple of photographers that really helped shape my approach to photography. Two guys named Larry West and John Shaw. And two of the very best. They're legends if you were to look them up. And John Shaw said something to me one time that just has really stuck with me and resonated with me. And he said, great photography is more dependent upon good light than it is where you are. Yeah. And that's what has really stuck with me through all these years, that no matter where you are, you can do great photos if the light is good. And it's funny that you mentioned fog, because my wife says that I live in a fog all the time. But I do love fog. I love mist. I love the light after a storm. I like all those edges of things that give things a different look than they look like every single day. So that's huge to me. And to me, fog is I call it nature's editor, because what it does is, if you think about it, it's very logical that things that are close are obvious and easily seen, and everything else fades back into the distance. I mean, you can take a lesson from the History Channel. They love fog because it takes out telephone poles and all those signs of man and makes the historical scene look the way it should. And I love the ephemeral sort of look that fog, the ethereal look that fog gives a scene. Sort of magical, and so I'm a victim of the fog fanaticism, which is why I love the time of year that we're coming into right now, because this is just extraordinary time of year. And the spring is often that way too, that you get those really different looks of places, and it's true. I do like to use fog a lot. And I like sunrises and sunsets, not just because they're cliche, and they are cliche in many ways, but I've always felt like if you do a sunrise or sunset, unless it's something really special with clouds or whatever, that you need to give it a sense of place, a sense of scale. And this is totally off subject, but to make the point, I was fortunate enough to be up in Churchill, Manitoba. I was there in the summer because they were promoting snorkel diving with whales, which was very cool, very cool. So it had nothing to do with the polar bears that you usually think of when you're in Churchill. But the polar bears are still there, and one crossed the river while we were there, the Churchill River, and we were in a boat. We happened to be in a boat at the time, so we came up alongside of it. And I'm shooting these headshots of a polar bear swimming. And suddenly it hits me that I could be shooting these at the zoo. Uh-huh. So I've got these great shots of a polar bear, but there's no sense of place. And that's the way I feel about sunsets, that, okay, it can be beautiful and moving, but you have no sense of where you're at and why this scene is really so great. So what I did was I backed up. By the time that I came to this realization, the polar bear was almost on shore, so my best shots of it are coming out of the water onto this very sparse, tundra type beach. So they're pretty cool, and I'm proud of the shots, but I'm embarrassed that I did what I did. So,
hey everybody, thanks for checking out this episode. If you feel like you're getting something out of it, go down in the link below and buy me a coffee. The Aptitude Outdoors podcast is fully self-funded by me. So if you're digging it, I'm just throwing out a tip jar, and I appreciate you listening. Let's dive right back into this episode. Something that I've been doing lately, so when my grandpa passed away a few months ago, and we found all these old photo albums just family photos, old lake photos, just like the quintessential photos from like the 40s and 50s that people started getting cameras and they were easier to afford and stuff. And they're taking just candid photos. And it got me thinking, like, I really miss that style of photography because I grew up with those like old slide. We used to sit in the family room and watch slides like and like old family photos and stuff. I was like, I missed like a whole era of like cool photography. And it's fun now to like, I do a lot of nature photography, but on the side, like I take a lot of family photos. Both sides of my family have like little lake cottages up in Michigan, and I try and recreate those like candid family moments now, and try and like almost in that style of just like people goofing off, and like there's so many pictures of just people on boats like laughing, and it's like we're not getting those photos anymore.
That's great stuff. Yeah.
So do you like? You've been able to 50 years working at Metroparks is one thing, but photography for a lifetime is a whole different story. Do you seen the technology change drastically over your lifetime?
Oh my God, yeah.
Do you miss the simpler cameras, or is this like, are we so spoiled now that
cameras are still simple? They really are. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think it's easy to get put off by all the different settings you can go to, and there is a function for all of those. Frankly, I don't use but maybe 20% of the things the camera can do because it's just not necessary. But there are special situations that you need to know how to call on it. So those are the kind of things that come with experience. But I tell people a camera is just a box with a hole in it to let light in. And there's basically three things you control. You know, you got a hole. How big is it? How long are you going to leave the hole open for light? And how sensitive is the material you're putting the light onto? That's all it is. It's like driving a car. You don't need to understand everything in the car to drive it. You got to steer, brake, and accelerate, and that's it. And I tend to accelerate more than any of those things, but that's a whole different story. So it's a simple thing where you start and you can take it anywhere you want to go. To me, that's the cool thing about photography, that there's no rules. You can do bad photos and nobody cares. Yeah. Just shoot to your heart's content. The reason I love to use photography when I'm working with someone, and what I was trying to do with a lot of the programs I did with the parks, maybe 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of photography programs. And what people, I hope they didn't catch that I really wasn't teaching photography. I was teaching nature appreciation, because my feeling was always, if you can get somebody to focus closer on things in nature, it's fascinating. You'll never get away from it once you start to discover the details. And going back to your point about how special what we have here is, and it is, what we have is extraordinary. It's not mind-blowing like standing on top of Mount Everest or something like that. We're not blessed with hundreds of big lookouts, but we are blessed with details. Mm-hmm. And I think if you get down on your hands and knees and start focusing on the small things, the little ferns, the insects, the butterflies, and there are bigger things like deer that we have, which calls to mind one of the truly great naturalists that we had here is a gentleman named Harold Mayfield. I don't know if you ever heard that name before. No. It's too bad that you haven't, because these things kind of get lost in time. Harold was extraordinary. He and Lou Campbell and Lou Kluwer, there were some truly big names in this community that understood nature, that pushed for preservation of parks, that helped us build the foundation of the Metroparks. And Harold was an extraordinarily thoughtful and intelligent man, a scientist, basically. He's the guy who discovered where the Kirtland warbler wintered, because nobody knew where they went once they left Michigan. And that laid the groundwork for being able to save the birds, save the species. But I asked Harold one time, I was doing a radio interview with him, and I was the host, as you are today, and I asked Lou, I'm thinking Lou Campbell, I asked Harold, the context was, people think wilderness is the be-all, end-all of things. So I asked him to compare the wilderness of Alaska, which we think of, in this dreamy, and justifiably dreamy, wonderful, big mammals everywhere. God, that's wilderness the way it should be, versus what we have. And he talks like a professor. He was an amazing guy. He said, the appeal of Alaska and the northern wilderness, it is not much changed. I remember him using the phrase that way. It is not much changed. What we have here has been altered. But, he said, all life depends ultimately on climate and fertility of soil. And we have that far more than anything to be found in Alaska. And he said, anywhere that nature is set aside in our area is far richer in terms of species than anything that you'll find in Alaska. And that really stuck with me. I thought, and that's kind of been my mantra ever since, that what we have may not hit you right in the face as being like this ultimate, stunning kind of look. But the details that we have are just incredible. This is what we have for macro photography around here, and what I would call breadbox size photography is just amazing. So there's, as Harold said, there's much more here than you'll find in Alaska.
I've done a fair amount of traveling, for being, 33. I feel like I've traveled a lot more than most people my age, especially from this area. Mm-hmm. And I would say I have to agree. I mean, it's one of those things where everyone that I know from Toledo is always like, I just want to get the hell out of here. That's all they talk about is they want to get out of here. Then they go away, and then they realize how much everywhere else sucks comparably. It's more expensive. There's not this richness that we have in the local area and the diversity of wildlife and things like that. And they come back, and then they stay here. It's just, it's the story of the Toledo area, it feels like.
Well, and what we do have is not just special to those who understand it. It's special in terms of national standing, international standing, in the case of the oak savannas of oak openings. The Nature Conservancy, which is a highly respected organization that I love working with, has called the oak openings one of America's last great places. Yeah. And that's not a long list. I mean, that puts us on par with the Everglades. Think of any special area you want, and oak openings is ranked right there with them because of what we have there. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. And the other two, we have a lot of really special stuff. But to me, if you had to summarize the things that stand out the most, it would be the oak openings, the Maumee River, and the Maumee River Valley, which is extraordinarily beautiful, and the wetlands, the remnants of the black swamp and the wetlands that are associated with it. Those three things are, the Maumee River is the biggest feeder to the Great Lakes system. People don't realize that. Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal, and it was a major traffic route in our prehistory and in our early history. It was an important transportation corridor. The wetlands are, as you know, extraordinarily rich. There's probably nothing more productive than wetlands. And presidents used to come here to hunt their ducks because this was the place to come. And if you've been out in the marshes, and I know you have, spring and fall during migration, it's extraordinary. The songbird migration alone is, people are discovering it in huge numbers. And It has some real consequences, not in just feel-good stuff and quality of life, but people are spending money when they come here to see that stuff. It's good for the community. Nature preservation is economic development.
Yeah, it's huge around here. I don't think people realize the amount of organizations we have around here. I mean, they're coming out of the woodwork. The more I talk to people and the more I dig, I mean, I'm just finding within this region alone, there's just organization after organization after organization trying to protect these areas because they're underappreciated by the general public. And the hardest issue I have talking to people, and I feel like I'm yelling at a brick wall, is the Maumee River is not disgusting. It is an amazing resource. That's why I set out, I paddled the whole thing because I had to know what the fuss was about. What's the deal? I didn't grow any weird extra limbs or anything. I'm totally fine. I spent 4 days in that water. I'm doing all right. It got a little stinky sometimes. That's about the extent of it. And that's all stuff that we're doing as humans. The river in and of itself, have you ever seen the river run clear? I've only seen a few spots here and there.
Well, no. And actually, Harold Mayfield, again, to use his name again, sort of put a note on that by saying that the Maumee has probably always been. Harold was a natural historian as well. He said it probably never really ran clearer certainly than it does today. But yeah, in fact, he talked about some of the feeder streams, Swan Creek, for example. He said that probably did run pretty clear and probably was a trout stream at one point. So yes, things are maybe not as good as they used to be, but they're also better than they used to be in the sense that in the 50s when I was growing up, the sewage treatment along the river in all those small communities was really not very good, and some of them were just literally dumping into the stream, and that's over with. I mean, there's good treatment facilities up and down the river. Agricultural chemicals are probably another story, but I don't point a finger at the farmers and say you're bad guys. You know, most of them care a lot and they're trying to do better, but there's a reality of they got to raise some crops and we want them to. You know, I mean, I enjoy the food that they produce, so we got to work with them, and I think they're trying really hard. So there's a lot of encouraging things to me as I look around. People seem to care a lot about the outdoors. There's so many different kinds of things to do. As you understand, you do a lot of different things in the outdoors. Some people are more focused. Like me, I don't hardly go out without a camera. But you know, it's an enriching experience to be outdoors, and good for the psyche, good for the soul. It's a real quality of life issue to have all these areas. And, you know, we're fortunate to have all these metro parks. And I'm pleased to have been a part of a lot of that. And proud that they're open every day of the year and they're free of charge. And, you know, access, you know, get your money's worth. Go often.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't cost any more. So,
well, name one place where you can go in the rest of the state. And maybe I'm just, you know, biased here, but name one place where you can go. There's a park within every, 5 minutes of every home or 5 miles?
Yeah, that was a goal we set 30 years ago. And this board made it happen.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we have a
cool.
free archery park. Yeah. Where are you going to find that? That's one of the most underutilized resources in the area, in my opinion. It's a great, I love that place.
Well, I think the idea, which is fairly recent to the parks, of developing outdoor skills, there's lots of routes to enjoying the outdoors, and that was one we hadn't touched on very much. So I'm really proud to see what they've done with the kayaking, the paddleboarding, the list is really long of the kind of experiences you can have in the parks that are different than what you could have had 20 years ago.
I was asked recently, what does the outdoors mean to you? To me, the outdoors is everything. It's like the growth model that consumes the entrepreneur, or the unending drive that pushes the athlete to outperform the competition. It's the greatest teacher of life lessons, whether it be learning to accept that most things are out of your control, or that the trees, the rivers, the mountains move along whether you're there or not. It's the motivator that keeps me accountable to my physical and mental health, because if I don't have the strength and conditioning to do the things that I enjoy outdoors, whether they be hunting, fishing, backpacking, adventure racing, or tackling some long-distance adventures, then everything becomes exponentially more difficult. Most importantly, the outdoors allows me to be, to think, to exist in the same plane that the majority of the natural world still exists in, to break the bonds from what we call civilization. The outdoors is freedom, a place where life and death are one and the same. The prime example of what it means to exist. In my mind, there's no separation. The outdoors simply is, as all things should be, perfection in its most chaotic form. The outdoors is you, it's me, it's all of us.
Well, I want to go on record and say I blame the Metroparks that I'm broke, because they are the ones they got me into all that. I worked there for a summer, and I fell into all these activities, and now I'm like, man, I wish I would have never learned about all this stuff, because I would have a lot more money in my wallet right now.
Don't take up too much photography.
Oh, trust me, that's
yeah.
that can be pricey. One thing that kind of took my attention looking through some stuff that the news had written about you and things of that nature and articles. So you said there was a time where they used to keep deer in a pen at oak openings because the numbers were so low, and I can't even fathom that because I just grew up with that around. You know? So
you grew up in a time of good wildlife management, the Division of Wildlife, and I know they take a hit from some people and so on, but you know, when all is said and done, they do a great job of managing wildlife in general, and deer in particular. I mean, they were extirpated from Ohio virtually, and I'm not sure the time period exactly. When I think about the 30s was when they really started to wane, and it kept going downhill from there because hunting was uncontrolled, basically, and you know, managing the herd has brought that back, but my reference point is the mid to late 50s and early 60s when I would go to oak openings, and one of the things you look forward to is seeing the deer in the pen because you would not see them in the wild. They were very difficult to see if they were even present. I don't even know the answer to that. They were rare enough that the Stranahan family, which became Wildwood Preserve, they brought in English fallow deer and released them onto the property so that they would have some deer on the land, which probably made for some interesting crossbreeding. I'm not sure. One of the guys that I have so much respect for that I worked with was a gentleman named Joe Croy, and when he heard that, I was in the room when he heard it for the first time, and he said, "Man, that explains some of the things I see in the deer here. You know, they're white-tailed deer, but not quite. So I'll bet that explains the interbreeding, giving them that sort of unique look." So. But that's how rare they were, that, you know, people that wanted to see them brought them in and released them on their property. So, where do you want to go from there?
Yeah, that's interesting because I've never heard that. I never knew that they had the fallow deer introduced in the parks, and I didn't know that the numbers. I mean, I knew that they were extirpated, but I didn't know the numbers were so low that they were like non-existent.
They were non-existent
because now we have almost the opposite problem. People are getting annoyed with deer from eating their plants in their yards, and stuff, especially areas, in the city and stuff, which. It's understandable, I guess, but at the same time, you know,
it is. If you spend $10,000 on landscaping and the deer decide that that's dessert because it's nice and tender and juicy and tasty, I understand that issue. And there are some things you can do that you know are non-invasive to the deer, but it's a tough problem in some places. The Maumee River Valley, as you know, is a real focal point for. There's a lot of richness down there, a lot of good food. So the valley itself is one of the concentrations that has to be dealt with. And we've been doing that with some population controls in the parks. And I don't know the details of it. I'm not involved with that. But I know they're doing a better job of, you know, keeping some of the impact of the deer herd off the natural areas. Mm-hmm. But I do remember, I guess just to go back to the deer pen for just a second, it was in the mid-'70s that we just sort of looked around and said, you know, it's easier to see deer in the wild. And I was on staff at the time, and the decision was made to dismantle the deer pen and release the deer that were there. The deer that were there, by the way, were deer that had been picked up. We didn't go out and intentionally take deer. The Division of Wildlife would occasionally come upon animals for one reason or another that were healthy enough to you know, not be put down, and so they were brought to the deer pen and released. So I think we were down to, we had not replaced any of the animals in recent years. I think we were down to 3 or 4 animals at that time. It was interesting. The day we cut open the fence and let them out, they sort of, it's like they almost didn't know what to do. They turned around and looked at us like, you know, is this okay that I'm over here? And then they were gone. And that was the end of the deer pen, which was, if people are wondering, when I first started going there, it was on the property that's now the caretaker's house.
Okay.
And the caretaker's house was there. The pen was in the front yard of that house, which was the manager's residence at the time. And then later on, it was moved to the end of the parking lot at Mallard Lake. And the clearing is still there where the fence was. So
that's interesting. Yeah. That's so cool. I love learning about the history of this area. It's just, there's so many things that you just don't know that you don't know. And that was one. I didn't even know they had a deer pen. So the parks, they've changed since I've been growing up. They've changed drastically since I was a kid till now, because when I was a kid, it was like the place my grandma took me to run around and burn off all my energy when she was watching me. The playground at Wildwood, the playground at Swan Creek, we just go and play. And it was great to be outside. I think it's good to get kids outside, but now they do everything under the sun. How have you seen things change over your career in the park? I mean, it's been
it's been really an interesting process to watch, and it comes to there's this sort of emerging sense of all the different ways you can use the outdoors. You can use it through the arts, you can use it through sports, you can do it through photography. There's so many different ways to enjoy the outdoors. And I think the current staff at Metroparks has just done a fantastic job of recognizing all those things. But when I started, we were much smaller to begin with. We were about half the size in terms of acreage, 5,000 and some acres instead of over 10,000. We had been a very poor agency through our first 40 years approximately, sort of living off of whatever the county commissioners had extra in their budget. And we reached a point where there wasn't anything extra. That cost had caught up with all of their, what was called inside millage. And our only choice was to go on the ballot and try to get a stable source of funding through a tax levy. And they passed one in 1971. It was on the heels of that I started at the parks, so 1972. And there were a lot of people that all of a sudden there was a little bit of cash in the coffers. $1 million a year was the Austin Powers line about what he tries to bribe the world by saying, I'll destroy the world unless you give me $1 million. And everybody goes, you don't made $1 million. You made $1 billion, don't you? Well, we had $1 million, which in those days, allowed us to do things we'd never thought about before. And as I looked around, I remember thinking that we were essentially a picnicking weekend park system. What you did was, and it was wonderful, you'd throw the family into the station wagon, go out to Oak openings, and enjoy a Sunday at the park. I did that when I was a kid, and a lot of people did that. Not a lot of weekday use. And what changed was a real growing awareness that fitness was an issue. Whether you walked, ran, skied, whatever it might be, anything you did foot power would be good for your health. And if you do it in the parks, you have the added bonus of enjoying the outdoors. Well, that set off, that was like lighting the powder keg from there. And things have just boomed since then, where there was pressure to open up the parks earlier, stay open later, all that sort of thing happened. More trails, let's get better surfaces on some of the trails. All kinds of things happen, and we've tried to respond over the years. And at the same time, acquire more land and more facilities so we can do more things. And the decision was made really before me, but especially during those first few years where we had more money. There was pressure from some quarters to, we need more ball diamonds, we need more tennis courts, all of which is becomes. It's very important in the community, but it wasn't who we were. And if you read the law about special park districts, they really talk about conservation and preservation, not what I call active recreation, the ball diamonds, softball teams. Lord knows I love softball and all that sort of thing, but it wasn't who we were. So we resisted a lot of that. And went for let's go forward with trying to acquire more parkland, put in more trails, make better access for people, and so on. And of course, Wildwood Preserve was a big turning point back in the mid-'70s, which, as you probably know, was a very controversial thing at the time. Almost didn't happen because of, there were lots of economic pressures at the time. But it's interesting, if you go back to Lou Campbell's notes, one of the reasons Lou Campbell was so special, he wrote a nature column for the Toledo Times, which was the sister paper to the Blade, which I don't know how many people remember that, but the Times was a morning paper and the Blade was an afternoon paper. And Lou wrote for the morning paper, and he was a great writer, very in tune with nature and the outdoors. He also had a job that took him out into the rural areas of the community. He worked for Community Traction, which became TARDA. And at the time, Lou was the engineer who surveyed for routes for new interurban lines for Community Traction. So he had a chance to get out into nature a lot. And he had come to know nature himself he was mostly self-taught. He said his first, he was known as a bird expert, and he said, well, my first real knowledge of birds was how they tasted.
There we go.
So he would go out fishing with his buddies, and they'd, take a few sparrows or something and cook them over a campfire, and that was their lunch.
Yeah.
And they would do that in what is today Swan Creek Metro Park. But Lou became a real champion of what areas should be preserved. He's one of the early people to push preservation of the oak openings. He and Harold Mayfield were great friends and would do a lot of this survey work themselves. And one of the things that Lou did, which is really interesting, if you read his field notes, he was putting together a memo on what's next for the parks, where should they acquire land. And he was talking about this beautiful wooded ravined area on Central Avenue near Quarry Road. And he said, it's in an area of really expensive homes. I don't think we're ever going to be able to afford it, but wow, would this be a great park? And of course, he's talking about Wildwood Preserve. But then there was a later note added in the margin that too late, the Stranahan family has acquired the property as an estate. And which he wasn't saying that was a bad thing. He just said that this means that I didn't think it could be a park, and obviously it can't. And then there's another note in the margins that says something like how happy he is that the Park District has now acquired the property. And that was probably 40 years after the original note. So, some things come full circle. But the interesting thing is that many studies of open space in this area where they started to survey what would make good parkland. Almost all of them name Wildwood Preserve, what's now Wildwood Preserve, the Stranahan Estate, as an ideal metro park, but we probably won't be able to afford it. So it was like, this would be great, but let's move on to something that's more realistic. So, but the public spoke otherwise when they had a chance to preserve it and passed a levy just to acquire Wildwood. So I think even though the vote was almost 50-50, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many people that thought it was a bad thing to happen. So,
I mean, that's iconic around here. That's the park. Everyone goes to Wildwood. That's like where they go.
Well, and that, I used to be what Scott Carpenter is now for the parks, and it was always a challenge to try and get people, you welcomed people at Wildwood, but you didn't want Wildwood to be overused and become a park that was going to wear itself out due to its own beauty and popularity. Yeah. So the challenge was always, sure, let's get people to Wildwood, let them hopefully they begin to understand the outdoors and love the outdoors, and let's remind them that Secor Metro Park is just down the road. Swan Creek is not far away. Yeah. So let's get them out to some of the other parks as well, and that's when the usage started to spread out a little bit through the parks. And interestingly, over and over again, Wildwood would come up as the most visited park, but the one that would come up, and I think it's because of its location that it was a little more special to go there, was Oak Openings. It came up over and over again as I love Wildwood, but the really special place to go is Oak Openings. And I think it was because it just wasn't that accessible. Mm-hmm. It was more of a treat to drive all the way out to Oak Openings and enjoy. In the old days, you could feed the ducks that were there and all that. And that was a big family thing. So,
well, I hate to say it, but Oak Openings is definitely my favorite park. I mean, it is.
Why would you hate to say that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's everybody has a different favorite. Mm-hmm. And I have a different favorite depending upon what day it is, what time of year. I'm a huge fan of wetlands. I just think wetlands are so incredibly important. And I was a really early advocate of saving what's now Howard Marsh. And didn't think we could do it. That's another one of those that, this started back when Howard was originally, was sold as farmland. And that would have been, I'm losing track of years now. I think in the 80s, late 80s, that it was sold. And I was like, darn it, we missed a chance. But at that time, I thought really the only people that could do it would be the feds with the National Wildlife Refuge right there. And they just didn't have the budget to do that. So, we all thought, okay, that's it. It's over with. Well, on comes John Jager and some other people that, their mission was to and their assignment was to find land to be acquired. And John did a great job of organizing the resources that were needed to preserve that property. So, and many others too, but John was the spearhead of that. And I think Howard is just, if people haven't been there, it's really a great place to see now, and it's going to keep getting better and better and better as it matures as a wetland.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because I was just talking to my dad over the weekend, and we were talking about fishing or something, and he was like, "Yeah, back when I was a kid, we would go to Howard Marsh and we would just pull in buckets and buckets and buckets of fish, by the day," or maybe it was a different part. It was one of the.
I'm only looking puzzled because that was mostly farmland, but there was a canal through the property that might have been good fishing, and certainly there's good fishing in the area. Metzger's, that's
what he was talking about.
Which is right next door to Ottawa. I mean, it's all so rich. I mean, that's the thing that's maybe so hard to understand, especially if you sort of think that what we have here is, bad, ruined, whatever the right, so degraded that it doesn't do anything. There's still so much life that's produced by a wetland. It's incredible. The invertebrates that it produces, they bring in the ducks feed on the invertebrates, the same invertebrates feed some of the fry that are late. It's just such an amazing mechanism when you come down to it.
I want to circle back to Lou Campbell. I saw something that said they're working on reissuing his original book.
Right.
And you're kind of...
By we, they mean me.
Okay, so good. You're the person to talk to.
Scott Carpenter and I really thought about this a while ago, and there were others, Denise Gehring and so on, that really had a lot of respect for Lou and his incredible knowledge of the yoke openings and his insight into what was going on there. And he wrote a booklet that I think is dated... I'm not sure when the original version was done, but I've seen a revised version from the 50s. So it's a more than 50-year-old document, but it's still current. If you read it, it still reflects on what you can find in the yoke openings today. So basically what we've done, and I hope it's going to be online soon. I know Scott's working on it. The original text is unchanged, but we've added photography and a few side notes. I've picked up some quotes from things like the orchids of the oak openings. Lou made some special mentions of that in his field notes. So we dropped in a little bit of that. But it's essentially what we want to do is let today's generations see what Lou Campbell saw in the oak openings. And it's really an interesting read. It's very short. It's only, I'm not even sure how many pages it is, 25 maybe. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that'll be online soon.
That is good news, because I've heard about that book for years and years, but I've never been able to actually get my hands on a copy. And sometimes those out-of-print books can get exorbitantly expensive, no matter how long or short they are. But I'm very excited for that, because I love books about nature, and I love books about local nature, which there's not a ton, Mm-hmm. Which, speaking of, you got this guy right here, Richest in Rarity. Great book. So many good local facts. You did a lot of the photography for this. Was this a culmination of new photography and archive photography, or is it all new, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, it's like most projects that are this large. I mean, you can see it's a big book, and there's over 200 photos in there. So you don't shoot 200 photos that are editorially appropriate. in a matter of a few months. It's just not possible. So you have to go back into your archives, as you say. But yet there's always something that, we need to illustrate this a little better. So there's probably, it's probably a 60-40, 70-30 kind of relationship, 60% out of the files and 40% new. And I love projects like this. It gives you a real mission when you go outside. But as you know, you've spent so much time in the outdoors. Well, let me back up and say there's been a couple of unfortunate times where somebody has said, can you go out today and get a shot of a bluebird? It's like, really? I mean, okay, I'll try. And it happened. I got it. I got not just good shots, but some great shots of the last bluebird box in action. And then somebody said, why don't we're the levy campaign coming up. Our symbol was a buck deer. Somebody said, can you go out today and get a big picture of a big buck, a nice picture of a big buck? I said, I don't know. you know what the odds are on this kind of stuff? So I went out and I did it. It was an accident. It's not that I'm so good at it. It's just that nature cooperated. So I had this reputation of, you can ask Art at the last minute and he'll go out and get the shots. It doesn't happen that way, It just, especially like with wildflowers or something, it's like, we got a rare wildflower. Would you go out and shoot the picture? It blooms in June. This is September, this doesn't work. Come on. So, the archives are really, really important. You have to build them as you go and try to get things that are seasonally appropriate with each season. And, we happen to be moving into the best, what to me is the best time of year. Obviously, the spring is extraordinary too, but I love the fall.
Yeah.
The spider webs, the butterflies, all that stuff, and then you start getting the colors, the misty mornings, the fog, and so on. It's really, to me, it's a magical time of year.
I'll say the book is awesome because it's readable. There's lots of articles by a lot of different people. It's not just, and it's concise. It gets the point across. Anybody can digest it, but the coffee table value of the photos in here is just amazing. I mean, you just thumb through, even if you don't like reading and you don't like all the nerdy facts about the oak openings. I mean, I look through here and the thing that I see is I'm like, I know where that's at. I know where that's at. I know where that's at. Cool. And I love that because it just connects to me on a whole new level and I get to learn more. So from the perspective of you who's been doing this for a long time, what are some of your favorite areas to photograph locally? I know that's just like asking about who's your favorite child, and everybody has one where they want to admit it or not.
Well, there's just the problem is there's not just one answer, and the answer fine. Really is it depends. What day is it? What's the weather like? I've had a lot of requests from people. Can I spend a day in the field with you? Yeah, but I don't know when I'm going to be in the field or where. Mm-hmm. And literally, I try to explain to folks that there's a lot of mornings where I'm going out. I know that the light's going to be good, which is why I'm going out. I don't go out every day. Mm-hmm. And literally, I get to the end of my driveway and decide there whether I'm going to turn right or left. And the next intersection is right or left or straight. I'm evaluating what I see based on, it's not that I'm better or anything. I've just been doing it a long time. And I know when I see, things happening that if today I go to Blue Creek Metro Park, there's going to be a great sunrise. I know that from the way it looks. So that's where I go. Or maybe down to Roche de Boux Rapids. I have some real go-to spots for mornings versus evenings. And usually they involve something that has some depth to it. It's not really close-up stuff I'm looking for. I'm looking for those things that you can get an idea what a savanna really looks like, because you can see through it. And maybe the fog helps to give it all depth and lets you get the feel of the spread of the trees and all that sort of thing. Or the sunrise reflected in a perfectly calm pool. All those things are things that you notice as you go. Is the wind up enough? Well, if the wind's up, you're not going to get a perfect reflection. So I'm going to go somewhere else. So that's why I don't know how you're going to find me on a different morning. And I know that to most of the staff of the parks now, I'm probably just a ghost. It's like somebody they know is around sometimes, but they never see me. So am I there or not?
Yeah.
I guess I prove it with the photos I send. So
yeah, and that's something that you can only get with experience, because my favorite part of photography is learning. You learn so much about the animal. You learn about like where they're going to be habitat wise, because for the longest time, the hardest thing for me was like, how am I going to find an owl? I didn't know where to go. I start reading about owls. I start looking. And then, one day my buddy calls me and he goes, hey, there's an owl at Wildwood. And then he's like, how are you going to find it? Or I'm like, how are you going to find it? And it was like, there will be like 100 people.
Yeah.
Anymore. So, but From a conservation perspective, this podcast has kind of morphed into a conservation-oriented podcast, and I thought that was the direction I needed to take things, because it's fun to talk about. This is fun to go kayak, and it's fun to do this, but like, what's the point? For me, it's to conserve the wildlife, to conserve the natural resources. Do you think that photography plays a role in aiding with conservation because it's so visual and you can tell a story with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can show you a few photos in that book that there's one of a snapping turtle in there that is one of my favorite shots in the whole book. That if we were just to sit here and start talking about snapping turtles, they can be big, they look ancient, they're brown, they have a hooked beak, I mean, we can talk about those things and it's kind of a, okay, no big deal. But if I show you that photo and then talk about the snapping turtle, now it's all meaningful. You have some context for it. So I think the visual is really important to give things context. And hopefully it's a snappy visual, to use an old-fashioned word, that really attracts your attention and makes you interested in the subject. Now, for a while, I had a project at Secor called the National Center for Nature Photography, which I'm very sad didn't make it very long after Karen Pugh and I decided to go a different way. But one of the missions of that place that maybe wasn't so obvious was I wanted to bring in nationally known photographers who had photos of Yosemite, Yellowstone, South America, really pristine, beautiful places. And I wanted to line those photos up against photos from here. Mm-hmm. And the unspoken message is that, wow, that was shot here. They're looking at pictures of Yosemite, which are blowing them away, and then there's a shot that's taken right here that lines up with that. It may be a very different kind of subject, and probably is a very different kind of subject, but the attention it grabs and the beauty in the shot leaves you surprised that maybe this isn't such a bad place to live. That's the point, that we have so much here if you just open your eyes to it. And that was where we were trying to go with the photo center. So, yeah, do I think visuals play a role? If they make you understand that what we have here is special, yeah, that's an important message, And hopefully that translates into I want to support these parks. I want to visit them, support them. I want this to be, something that's a part of my life. And I think that's really important. And you did make the point that, and I don't want to minimize what we've set aside in this community because it's significant and it's really important. It's also, when you say we have lots of land, if you percentage-wise compared to the area of the county itself, it's not a huge percentage. So I think it's reasonable to say, should we save 5% of the land in natural area? Is that enough? I don't know. I don't really know the answer. I leave that to other people to figure that out. But to say that we have lots and lots of land, okay, on the one hand, maybe it seems that way. But if you really put it in the perspective of have we saved enough, I'm not the right guy to say that.
I'll say it, no.
Well, personally, I think no. So I think our job's not done, in part because I think as time goes by, it's going to become more and more difficult to find areas that can quickly regenerate as natural areas. On the other hand, We need to save farmland. There's a lot of open space that needs to be saved, or at least protected for our own good, not for some, elite group of people. This is something for the whole community. So all those things are important, which is why I think agencies that really have sister or brother, if you prefer, purposes to the metro parks, like Black Swamp Conservancy, for example, Olander Park System. I mean, we're in this together. And you made the point earlier about hunting, and as though it's separate from everything else. But one of the things I really like to talk to hunters about is we're in this together. It's about habitat, dude. I mean, if we don't have habitat, we don't have anything for anybody to appreciate. So all of that comes into focus as important. Do we need reservoirs for wildlife where they're not hunted? Yeah, I think so. That's the metro parks. People can walk there without, for the most part, we do have some hunting that we allow under special conditions, but you can walk a trail, and the hunter doesn't have to worry about hitting that walker. The walker doesn't have to feel threatened. And there are other areas where each can enjoy their things. So I think that hunters are not separate from this whole thing. They're part and parcel of it all. And as you know, they pay a lot of the freight for, some of the outdoor preservation that's out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I could go on all day about how important and how emotional I get about all this stuff. It's been a mission in my life to get people to appreciate Ohio, because I think Ohio is an incredible state. And frankly, I've never been anywhere that I haven't found, some real beauty and some things to appreciate. From upstate New York to the Yukon to Alaska to the West Coast to southern Louisiana there's fantastic stuff. If we just open our eyes to it and hopefully work to save it, to make sure that the next generations see it. And I'll shut up now. That's my...
No, you captured so many of the sentiments that I share about the outdoors and this area and any area particularly. And, as someone who, I hunt, I do it for food. I mean, it's a simple, is with inflation nowadays.
I think it's an important conservation issue too. I mean, the deer population needs to be controlled. I shoot with camera, so I'm not out there gun hunting, but I see the issues. If you overgraze an area, none of the deer are healthier for it. So, the message is you preserve the species, conserve the individual, and I didn't make that up. That's my buddy Mark Shieldcastle out at used to be a Division of Wildlife out at McGee, but I believe that.
Yeah,
and I think that holds true all the way down the line. Even to the mosquito, you don't want to kill all the mosquitoes. They're an important food source for a lot of animals. But I guess we'd like to control them enough that you don't come running 100 miles an hour out of the woods because they're biting you. So there are levels of control that you want to have, and I think it's important to measure that in with everything else.
Well, I'm a huge proponent of the program that the park started putting out with the hunting. It's mostly unused land that's it's not like part with trails.
I love that. You're not doing anything with that land anyway.
I mean, it's the part. It's like the part of the parks where people aren't like running and riding bikes. It's just like these like patches throughout the areas that are kind of like being worked on, or kind of like they're doing work in them that aren't like, you're not going to have somebody and a guy with a bow standing over the trail, And it's a great program. And I mean, people don't like to hear that, but the deer are going to go one way or the other. You might as well, get somebody to use them and respect them.
The worst case is starvation. I mean, that's inhumane on a lot of levels.
I agree so much with that.
So it's part of the problem that we have to address and be reasonable about the solutions.
That's what I like to talk about on this podcast too, and you summarize the point that I always try and make is like we're all here in the same boat. Whether you love birding, whether you love hunting, whether you love fishing, whether you like hiking in the park and just looking at the natural beauty,
right.
it doesn't matter what you're into. We're all here for the same reason. Why are we arguing about it? There's no reason to argue about it. We're all here for the same reason. You love to take photos. I love to take photos. This guy likes to take a 1/10 of a mile hike down the edge of the river for his lunch break. That's totally great. Everybody here, we're all on the same page, or we should be on the same page.
That's right.
Squabbling is not helping anyone. A question that I kind of have, and it might be a selfish question because I'm essentially doing this on my own dime, on my own fun, just to learn and just
I think
get
it's great.
these stories. But like, do you think the art of wildlife journalism and photography and photojournalism is kind of a lost art because of media nowadays? Everything is so bite-sized, and you get your 5 seconds of attention and then it's gone, and you get your Instagram photo and then it's like, oh cool, people like it for a day, and then it just disappears into the abyss. Whereas, people used to read magazines about wildlife and books about wildlife, and there's still a population of people that do. I'm one of them. I'm one of the nerds out there that still love that stuff. But do you think it's, I don't want to say it good or bad, things change. That's how the world operates. Things are always changing. But do you think it's a harder field now than it used to be?
I think it's a lot harder to get attention. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. And when I was a kid, there were mother-daughter, father-son banquets that, the big thing was always to get some wildlife photographer in that had done film up in the Arctic or something like that. It was a travelogue kind of thing, and that was the program for the night. You don't see stuff like that anymore. We used to have a Sunday nature program at Oak Openings that featured movies and then a nature walk. There's a lot of noise out there, and not that it's not good noise in some cases at least, but yeah, it's harder to get the attention, I think. On the other hand, if you're looking to get away from the noise, what better refuge is there than the Metroparks and nature? So, so it's kind of it's maybe not as good on the one hand, but on the other, we're even more important than we ever were as the refuge. What I used to call, for example, apartment owners, we're your backyard.
Yeah.
We're your place that you can go outside and have a picnic and, start the grill and all that sort of thing, and hopefully walk a trail, enjoy the wildlife. So in that context, we're the backyard for everybody in this area. And oh, by the way, there's some really good stuff out there that I hope you learn about while you're there. And we're more than just a backyard. We're a treasure. The line that I always thought really summarized who Metroparks were and are is that we are to the county what the national parks are to the nation. I think that sort of cements the vision of what I think Metroparks are to this community. Hopefully the very best of nature is preserved, and it's preserved so you can enjoy it every single day. That's what I hope people see in us, and I hope we're fulfilling that mission. And I do think that the current staff is just loaded with really talented, foresighted people that are doing some really great things. So things that, shame on me, I never thought of when I was in the office. But the time maybe wasn't right too. So it's an evolution, and I see great things happening.
I would agree. I think everyone's working in the best interest. And if we go very back to the beginning of the podcast, I know we're running on time here, but you talked about something that I've said on almost every episode is whatever avenue you're taking to get people interested, with the end goal being my end goal, my ulterior motive is to take people in the outdoors, do any activity, whether it's a short hike, whether it's a kayak, whether it's learning photography, whether it's just having a picnic. Whatever the activity is to get people hooked in the outdoors, whatever they enjoy. Some people love running. I don't know why they go out there and they run, but hey, if that's what they love to do, more power to them. Once you set that hook, then you can open up to these issues, the bigger issues, the conservation, the preservation, the funding, all this stuff that people are going to care about naturally as they get to the love of the outdoors. I think that is the important thing, because a lot of times, I'm guilty of it. I'm out here yelling like, conserve, help, please, anything, wildlife, please make sure this land doesn't go away. But these people are like, I don't even like going outside. Like, you have to do the simple, basic thing first before you get them hooked. And I feel like that put me on the right track. Like, if you're thinking the same thing, I feel like I'm doing something right, at least for once.
Well, and probably the forgotten season, even now, although it's more popular than it ever was, is winter, getting outdoors in the winter. But, I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, you can't undress enough to be cool on a 95-degree day. It's easy to dress warm enough to be out in the winter.
Oh, yeah.
So okay, which is more beautiful? I don't know. I think they're both beautiful, but I agree that getting out in the outdoors in any way is better than staying inside and leads to understanding. And some of it's even more simple than the big picture to me. It's like, if we're teaching canoeing, let's talk about the life underneath the canoe, how that relates to what's happening at the surface of the water. And if you're a fly fisherman, you know that that's key to look around and, what hatch are we having today? And you make your fly match the hatch. And, what birds are above that are coming down to drink, whatever, mammals coming to, there's so much you can teach just from a canoe. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happens walking down a trail. You stop to look at things. So I think it starts with some really simple things of opening people's eyes. We've had some really, really good naturalists over the years running nature programs, nature walks. And the thing that always fascinated me about it was kind of a stand back and, sort of chuckle at what you see in front of you. I loved going on school walks because, first of all, the school kids are just excited as can be to be out there. They see things that I miss. They're into it. They're also shorter, so they're closer to the things that I am. But the thing that I always loved, was that there were always parents along, and in some cases, the parents would start out being not aloof, but sort of this is for the kids, it's not for me. And by the end of the walk, they're down on their hands and knees with the kids looking at stuff. So they're actually being brought into nature by their own children. And I find that really fascinating that as adults, sometimes we think we're separate from nature. Kids don't have that barrier. And if you're out there with the kids, it starts to break it down. So I guess I'm saying if you're a family, get the kids out there and then follow their lead into what they're interested in, and you'll probably find some really great stuff yourself.
I would absolutely agree. And, I want to wrap up here. I know you got stuff to do. Everybody's got stuff to do all the time. But is there anything that you really would like people to know, or any kind of closing sentiment that, at the end of the day, something that you would like people to know about, whether this area, personal, whatever it is, whatever you want people to know?
I hope people paid attention to how hard it was for me to answer some of these questions. Like, what's your favorite thing? Literally every day is different. If you say you've been to a place in the parks, that's probably true, but you were there in July and it doesn't look different even the next day, but certainly not by August it's different. So, go back to these places over and over again, and you'll discover new things, different visitors, different animals coming and going. Speaking of winter again, it's the thing that I think is so cool about winter is following tracks. It's, there's evidence of life everywhere in the snow-covered woods. So that's probably not the question you asked me, because I'm ADD as can be, and I start to wander. It's like, want to ride bikes? Let's go.
Sure.
Anyway, no, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to talk to you, and obviously a kindred spirit. So, keep doing what you're doing. This is great.
Likewise, thank you for everything you've done and continue to do. You whether you know it or not, there are people out here like me and a lot of other people that I know that are highly inspired by your work. And
God, that makes me feel great.
We're just, you can't match it. I hope to be half this good someday.
No, you will. It's nature does it. It's just a matter of recognizing what's already out there. And there is really, really good stuff out there.
See, ladies and gentlemen, a true humble artist.
Nah.
They exist. Well, thanks, Art. I know we got some stuff you want to talk about, and I want to get you out of here because I'll talk to you all day. This will be a 5-hour
Well, we'll do
podcast.
this again sometime if you want. We'll make it work.